This is a reading from the Mystical City of God, The Incarnation, by Venerable Mary of Agreda. This is the second volume of a 4-volume set. Approbations. The first pope officially to take notice of Ciudad de Dios was Pope Innocent XI, who on July 3rd, 1686, in response to a series of virulent attacks and machinations of some members of the Sorbonne known to be Jansenists, issued a breve permitting the publication and reading of the Ciudad de Dios. Similar decrees were afterward issued by Popes Alexander VIII, Clement IX, and Benedict XIII. These decrees were followed by 2 decrees of the Congregation of Rites approved by Benedict XIV and Clement XIV, in which the authenticity of Ciudad de Dios as extant and written by the Venerable Servant of God, Mary of Jesus, is officially established. The great Pope Benedict XIII, when he was Archbishop of Benevent, used these revelations as material for a series of sermons on the Blessed Virgin. On September 26, 1713, the Bishop of Ceneda, Italy, objecting to the publication of the City of God, was peremptorily ordered by the Holy Office to withdraw his objections as interfering with the decree of Pope Innocent XI for the Universal Church. The process of canonization of Mary of Agreda was promoted by the Spanish bishops and other eminent men of the Church soon after her death in 1666. It has resulted so far in securing her the title of Venerabilis, thus clearing the way to her beatification, for which, let us hope, God will soon raise a promoter among the many pious and eminent men who hold in esteem her writings, and have learned of her holy life and of the miracles wrought at her tomb. The Redemptorist Fathers published a new German translation in 1885, which was approved and highly recommended by the Bishop of Ratisbon in the following terms. We take pleasure in giving our episcopal approbation to the annotated translation of the Spanish original, Ciudad de Dios, of Mary of Jesus, and recommend this book, which will surely edify all readers and be the occasion of great spiritual blessings. Ratisbon, September 29th, 1885. Ignatius, Bishop of Ratisbon. Notable is the high recommendation of the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, Apostolic Legate Primate of Germany, etc., according to the decrees of Pope Innocent XI and Clement XI, the book shown as Ciudad de Dios, written by the Venerable Servant of God, Maria de Jesus, may be read by all the faithful. A number of episcopal approbations, the recommendations of 4 renowned universities, namely of Toulouse, Salamanca, Alcalá, and Louvain, and of prominent members of different orders, coincide in extolling the above-named work. The learned and pious Cardinal d'Aguirre says that he considers all the studies of 50 years of his previous life as of small consequence in comparison with the doctrines he found in this book, which in all things are in harmony with the Holy Scriptures, the Holy Fathers, and councils of the Church. The Venerable Superior General of St. Sulpice, Abbé Emery, adds, "Only since I read the revelations of Mary of Agreda do I properly know Jesus and his Holy Mother. We therefore do not hesitate in granting our episcopal approbation to Ciudad de Dios, and wish to recommend it to the faithful, and especially to our clergy." Franz Albert, Archbishop. Archiepiscopal Chancery, Salzburg, September the 12th, 1885. A more recent official approbation of Ciudad de Dios is from the Bishop of Tarazona, prefacing the new edition of 1911 to 1912. We, Dr. James Ozoidi y Udave, by the grace of God and of the Apostolic See, Bishop of Tarazona, Administrator Apostolic of the Diocese of Tudela, etc., etc., having charged the priest Don Eduardo Arroyo, chaplain and confessor at the Convent of the Immaculate Conception of Agreda, carefully and exactly to compare the manuscript which is to serve as copy for the printing of the new edition of the City of God, now about to be published by the religious of the above-named convent, with the authenticated autographed manuscript of that work there preserved, and having ascertained by a personal revision of a great part of the manuscript that the said priest has diligently and faithfully fulfilled this charge imposed upon him by us, we now therefore certify that this present edition of Ciudad de Dios, with the exception of a few mere orthographic modifications, is entirely conformable to the autograph of that work as composed and written by the Venerable Mother of Mary of Jesus of Agreda, Tarazona, April 7th, 1911, accompanied with a diocesan seal. James, Bishop of Tarazona. Finally follows the official approbation of the Right Reverend Bishop of the Fort Wayne Diocese, where this English translation is published. Rome City, Ind, August 24th, 1912. The Reverend George J. Blatter. Dear Reverend Father, my imprimatur is herewith granted to your English translation of the work entitled Ciudad de Dios. Wishing you every blessing, I remain devotedly in Domino. Then the sign of the cross, H. J. Allarding, Bishop of Fort Wayne. The author has made use of capital letters in the text, slightly at variance with common usage, in order to avoid complication and secure greater clearness. The paragraph numbers are those of the newest Spanish edition of Ciudad de Dios in 1912. In the abridgment, they vary slightly. City of God is divided into 3 parts and 8 books. Part 1 contains books 1 and 2. Part 2 contains books 3, 4, 5, and 6. Part 3 contains books 7 and 8. As circumstances compel a serial publication of the 4 volumes, the author judged it best to head these divisions as follows: the Conception, books 1 and 2, the Incarnation, books 3 and 4, the Transfixion, books 5 and 6, the Coronation, books 7 and 8. As you can see here. The Incarnation. The mysteries of the life of the Holy Mother of God, from the incarnation of the divine Word in her virginal womb to the return of the Holy Family from Egypt. Now, the introduction is 20 pages long, so I'm not going to get through it all in one shot. Probably get halfway through. Introduction. When I was ready to present before the throne of God the insignificant results of my labors in writing the first part of the Most Holy Life of Mary, the Mother of God, I wished to subject it to the scrutiny and correction of the divine light by which I had been guided in my shortcomings. I was very anxious to be consoled by the renewed assurance and benign approval of the Most High, and to know whether he wished me to continue or to abandon this work, which is so far above my lowliness. The Lord responded, saying, Thou hast written well and according to our pleasure, but we desire thee to understand that in order to manifest the mysteries and most high sacraments of the life of our only and chosen spouse, mother of our only begotten, thou hast need of a new and more exalted preparation. It is our wish that thou die to all that is imperfect and visible, and that thou live according to the Spirit, that thou renounce all the occupations and habits of an earthly creature, and assume instead those of an angel, striving to attain in them a still greater purity, and an entire conformity with what thou art to understand and write. 2. In this answer of the Most High, I understood that such a high perfection of life and habits, and such an unwonted exercise of virtues was proposed and required of me, that, full of diffidence, I became disturbed and fearful of undertaking a work so arduous and difficult for an earthly creature. I felt within myself great repugnance rising up in the flesh against the Spirit. The Spirit called me with interior force, urging me to strive after the disposition which was required of me, and advancing as argument the pleasure of the Lord and the benefits accruing to myself. On the other hand, the law of sin, Romans chapter 7, verse 23, which I felt in my members, opposed the divine promptings and discouraged me by the fear of my own inconstancy. I felt a great distaste, which deterred me, and a great pusillanimity, which filled me with fear. In this excitement, I began to believe that I was not capable of treating about such high things, especially as they were so foreign to the condition and estate of a woman. 3. Overcome by fears and difficulties, I resolved not to continue this work, and to use all possible means to adhere to this determination. The common enemy knew my fear and cowardice, and, as his utmost cruelty is more aroused against the weak and disheartened, he made use of this very disposition to attack me with incredible fury. It seemed to him that I was left without help in his hands. In order to conceal his malice, he sought to transform himself into an angel of light, pretending to be very solicitous for my soul and for my welfare. Under this false pretext, he perfidiously deluged me with his suggestions and doubts. He represented to me the danger of damnation and frightened me with punishments similar to those of the chief of the angels, Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. Since I had sought in my pride to comprehend what was above my powers and in opposition to God himself. 4. He pointed out to me many souls who, professing virtue, were deceived by some secret presumption, and by yielding to the insinuations of the devil, and he made me believe that in so far as I sought to scrutinize the secrets of the divine majesty, Proverbs 25, verse 27, I could not but be guilty of pride and presumption. Thus, being already judged, he urged very strongly that the present times were ill-suited for such matters, and sought to confirm his assertion by what happened to some well-known persons who were found to labor under deceit and error. He reminded me of the dread of the spiritual life in others, how great would be the discredit which would arise by any mistake of mine, and what evil effect it would have on those of little piety. All this I would know by experience, and to my regret, if I persisted in writing about this matter. And as it is true evidently that all the opposition to the spiritual life and the small esteem in which the mystic virtues are held is caused by that mortal enemy, so, for the purpose of doing away with Christian devotion and piety in many souls, he succeeds in deceiving some, and in sowing the cockle among the good seed of the Lord. Matthew chapter 13, verse 25. Thus, he causes confusion and obscures the true sentiment concerning it, making it more difficult to distinguish the darkness from the light. I am not surprised to see him succeed therein, as the true discernment is a special work of God and of those who participate in his true wisdom, and do not govern themselves only by earthly insight. 5. It is not easy during this mortal life to discern true prudence from the false, for often also the good intention and zeal warp the human judgment, when counsel and light from on high are wanting. I had occasion to learn this in the execution of that which I am about to undertake. For some persons, well known as devout, not only those who love me on account of their piety and desired my welfare, but also those who are less loving and considerate, all alike at one time wished to deter me from this undertaking, and also from the path which I was going, as if I was proceeding upon it by my own choice. Their fear of drawing discredit or confusion upon those who were striving after piety with me, or upon religion, or my neighbors, and especially upon the convent in which I lived, caused them anxiety, and to me affliction. I was much enamored by the security which the ordinary paths of the other nuns seemed to offer. I acknowledge that this suited more my own insight and my inclination and desires, and was urged upon me still more by my timidity and my great fears. 6. Cast about upon these impetuous waves, my heart sought to reach the port of obedience, in order to reassure me in the bitter sea of my confusion. To add to my tribulation, it began to be rumored about in our order that my spiritual father and superior, who had for many years directed my soul, and who well understood my interior trials, who moreover had commanded me to write the preceding part of this history, who would most likely encourage, quiet, and console me, was suggested for removal to a higher office. The suggestion was not acted upon, but it occasioned his absence for many days, and the dragon took advantage of all this in order to pour out against me the furious river of his wrath. Apocalypse chapter 13, verse 15. Thus, though in vain, he exerted all his malice on this occasion and others to entice me from obedience and deprive me of the guidance of my superior and master. 7. In addition to all the contraindications and temptations already mentioned, and many others not possible to describe, the demon sought to deprive me of my health, causing many aches, indispositions, and disorders of the whole body. He harassed me with insurmountable sadness and conflicting thoughts. He seemed to confuse my understanding, hinder correct thinking, weaken my willpower, and sift me in body and soul. And it happened that in the midst of this confusion, I committed some faults, which were serious enough in me, although they were committed not so much in malice as from human frailty. Nevertheless, the serpent sought to use them for my destruction more than any other means, for thus, having interrupted the flow of good works, his fury was let loose to cause still greater faults in this embarrassment by inveigling me to exaggerate my guilt. To this he drove me by impious and most insidious suggestions, seeking to persuade me that all that I had experienced in the path which I had trodden was false and erroneous. 8. As these insinuations, on account of the faults committed and on account of my continual consternation and fears, began to appear plausible, I resisted them less than others. And it was only through the special mercies of the Lord that I did not fall entirely from all belief and hope in a remedy. But I found myself so entangled in difficulties and surrounded by darkness that I may say the groanings of death encompassed me, and the sorrows of hell engulfed me. Psalm 17, verse 5. Inspiring me with dread of extreme peril, I resolved to burn the manuscripts of the first part of this divine history and to desist from writing the second. The angel of Satan who inspired me with this resolution induced me also to withdraw myself from the whole undertaking, to put an end to the pursuit of the spiritual life, to neglect my interior life, and not to communicate about it with anyone. Thus would I be able to do penance for my sins, appease the Lord, propitiate him, and retain his friendship. In order to make sure of the effects of his concealed malice, he proposed that I make a vow not to write any more on account of the danger of being deceived and of deceiving, but that, instead, I amend my life, retrench my imperfections, and embrace penance. 9. With this mask of seeming virtue, the dragon pretended to establish his damnable counsels and cover himself with the skin of a sheep, while in reality he acted as a bloodthirsty and devouring wolf. He persevered for some time in this attack, and all alone I remained for 15 days in a night of darkness, without relief or consolation, either human or divine, without the former because I was without the help and the counsel of obedience, and without the latter because the Lord had interrupted the flow of his favors, his enlightenments, and continual inspiration. Above all, was I distressed by despair of salvation, and in it the persuasion that death and the danger of my eternal damnation was approaching. All this was instigated and fostered in me by the enemy. 10. But, as the aftertastes of his temptations are so bitter, and end but in despair, the very disturbance by which he upset the whole republic of my powers and acquired habits made me more wary of fulfilling anything which he urged on me and proposed to me. He availed himself of the continual fear which tormented me with dread of offending God and of losing his friendship. And when in my doubts I applied myself to works of piety, he sought to draw me away. This very fear, however, made me hesitate at what the astute dragon had tried to convince me of, and in this uncertainty I deferred giving assent to it. My high regard for obedience, also by which I had been ordered to write, and the contrariness of that which I felt in my interior, helped me to resist and to recoil at his suggestions. Above all, the assistance of the Most High defended me, and permitted not the beasts to snatch my soul, which amid sighs and groans confessed him. I cannot describe in words the temptations, combats, troubles, dismays, and afflictions which I suffered in this battle, for I saw myself placed in such a state that in my judgment there was really no greater difference between my condition and that of the damned, except that in hell there is no redemption, while in mine it was still possible. 11. One day, in order to get some respite, I cried out from the bottom of my heart, saying, "Oh, woe is me, that I have come to such a state, and woe to my soul, which finds itself therein. Whither shall I turn, since all the portals of my salvation are closed?" Immediately, a strong and sweet voice gave answer within myself, "Whither dost thou wish to go outside of God himself?" By this answer, I perceived that my cure was at hand in the Lord, and at the breaking of this dawn, I began to raise myself from the depth of the confusion into which I was cast, and I felt a powerful increase in the fervor of my desires and in the acts of faith, hope, and charity. I debased myself in the presence of the Most High, and in firm confidence in his goodness, I wept over my faults with bitter sorrow. I confessed them many times, and sighing from the depths of heart, I began to seek again the former light and truth. And as the divine wisdom comes forth to meet those by whom it is invoked, Wisdom chapter 6, verse 17, it advanced toward me in delight and cleared away the night of my confusion and tormenting afflictions. 12. Presently, that bright day broke, which I had desired so much. The quiet possession of peace returned. I enjoyed the sweet love and vision of my Lord and Master, and with it I again perceived why I should believe, accept, and esteem the benefits and favors which his mighty arm wrought in me. I gave him thanks as far as was in my power, and I saw who I was and who God is, that a creature by itself can do nothing, that it is nothing because sin is nothing. I saw also what man can do when raised up and assisted by the divine light, by the divine right hand, being much more than can be imagined by our earthly faculties. Humbled in the perception of these truths, and in the presence of the inaccessible light, which is vast and strong, without deceit or falsehood, my heart flowed over in sweet affections of love, praise, and thanksgiving. For now I understood that he had guarded and defended me, so that in the confused night of temptations my lamp might not be extinguished. Proverbs chapter 31, verse 18. And in the depth of my gratitude, I annihilated myself to the dust and humiliated myself as a worm of the earth. 13. To make this benefit more certain, I immediately heard an interior exhortation, without knowing clearly from whence it proceeded. While it severely reprehended me for my disloyalty and my wrongful ways, it at the same time admonished and enlightened, instructed and corrected me. It furnished me with a deep understanding of good and evil, of virtue and vice, of what was secure, useful, and beneficial, as well as their contraries. It laid open to me the way of eternity, gave me a knowledge of the means and of the end, of the value of life everlasting, and of the miserable unhappiness and the so little considered ruin of endless perdition. 14. In the profound knowledge of these two extremes, I confess that I was dumbfounded and cast about between the fear of my dreadful infirmity and the desire of reaching the happiness of which I was unworthy on account of my demerits. I was full of the thoughts of the kindness and mercy of the Most High and the fear of losing him. I beheld the two different ends awaiting the creatures, eternal glory and eternal misery, and it seemed a small matter to me to suffer all the pains and the torments of the world, of purgatory and hell itself, in order to attain to the one and to avoid the other. And although I perceive that the divine help is assured to those who seek to make use of it, yet as I also saw by this light that life and death are in our hands, Ecclesiasticus chapter 15, verse 18, and that our weakness or malice may prevent the proper use of grace, and that the tree will lie for all eternity as it once has fallen, Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 3. On this account I was overcome by the deepest sorrow, which penetrated my heart. 15. This sorrow was increased by a most severe answer or inquiry, which came from the Lord. For while I found myself thus annihilated in the consciousness of my weakness and danger, and by the thought of having offended his justice, so that I dared not raise my eyes toward him, he met my speechless sorrow by the advances of his mercy, saying to me in answer to them, Which dost thou wish, my soul? Which dost thou seek? Which of these ways wilt thou choose? What is thy resolve? This question was an arrow to my heart, for although I knew for certain that the Lord knew my desires better than I myself, the delay between the question and the answer was incredibly painful to me. I wished, if possible, that the Lord should anticipate my answer and should not show himself ignorant of the response which I would give. But, impelled by great emotion, I made response in words coming from the innermost of soul and said, Lord and omnipotent God, the path of virtue, the way of eternal life do I choose. This do I desire, and in this do thou place me. And as I do not merit it in thy justice, I appeal to thy mercy, and I offer for myself the infinite merits of thy most holy Son and my Redeemer, Jesus Christ. 16. I was made aware that this highest judge remembered the promise which is given to the church, that he would grant all that is asked in the name of his only begotten, John chapter 16, verse 23, that in him and on his account my petition was granted, and its fulfillment hastened according to my poor wishes. Certain conditions were made and proposed to me by an intellectual voice, saying to me interiorly, Soul, created by the hand of the Almighty, if thou wishest, as one of the elect, to follow in the path of the true light, and attain the position of a most chaste spouse of the Lord who calls thee, it is befitting that thou observe the laws and precepts of love. The first thing required of thee is that thou reject entirely all earthly inclinations, renouncing all and every affection toward the transient things, so that thou have no love or affection toward any created being, no matter how useful, beautiful, or agreeable it may appear to thee. Cherish no created image, harbor no earthly affection, let thy will rest in no created object, except in so far as thy Lord and spouse shall command thee for the well ordering of thy love, or in so far as thou canst be aided thereby to love him alone. 17. And when, after thus reaching this perfect abnegation and renunciation of self, thou shalt have freed and disentangled thyself from all earthly things, seek the Lord, raising thyself with the swift wings of the dove toward the high habitation in which he, in his condescension, wishes to place thy spirit, so that there thou mayest live in his presence and have a secure dwelling place. The great Lord is a most jealous spouse, and his love and emulation are strong as death. Canticle chapter 8, verse 6. He wishes to adorn thee and set thee in a secure place, in order that thou mayest not issue from it, or leave his presence for another, where thou findest him not, or enjoyest not his caresses. He with whom thou art to converse without mistrust wishes to sign thee with his own hand, and this is a most equitable law, which the spouses of the great King must observe, for even those in the world observe it, in order to show their faithfulness. It is due to the nobility of thy spouse that thou observe a behavior corresponding to the dignity and position conferred by him, without descending to anything not befitting this estate, or making thee unworthy of the adornment lavished upon thee for entrance into his bridal chamber. 18. Next, I require of thee that thou despoil thyself with diligence of the vestments torn by thy faults and imperfections, soiled by the effects of sin, and made odious by the inclinations of nature. His Majesty wishes to wash off the stains, to purify and renew thee with his beauty, but under condition that thou never lose sight of the poor and despicable vestments of which thou hast been divested, so that in the memory and knowledge of this benefit thou mayest spread the odor of sweetness for this great King by the nard of thy humility. Canticle chapter 1, verse 11. And so that thou mayest never forget the return which thou owest to the author of thy salvation. Thus will he, by the precious balsam of his blood, purify thee, heal thy wounds, and enlighten thee copiously. 19. In addition to all this voice continued to say, in order that thus forgetting all earthly things thou mayest be coveted by the highest King, seek to adorn thyself with the jewels which he, in his pleasure, has prepared for thee. The vestments which shall cover thee are to be whiter than the snow, more brilliant than the diamond, more resplendent than the sun, and yet they will be at the same time so delicate that they will easily be spoiled by any negligence, making thee abominable in the sight of thy spouse. But if thou preserve them in the purity which he desires, thy steps will be beautiful as the prince's daughter. Canticle chapter 7, verse 1. And his Majesty will be pleased with thy sentiments and thy words. As a cincture of thy vestment, he will give thee the knowledge of his divine power and his holy fear, in order that, having bound thy inclinations, thou mayest direct thyself by his pleasure. The jewels of thy necklace which adorn thy neck, signifying thy humble submission, shall be the costly stones of faith, hope, and charity. As a clasp for thy hair, which are the high and exalted thoughts and thy heavenly intelligences, thou wilt have from him the infused science and wisdom, and the embroideries of thy vestments shall be all the beauty and richness of the virtues. Thy diligence in performing what is most perfect shall serve thee as sandals, and they and the laces shall be the avoidance and restraints that thou wilt use in order to keep from evil. The rings which will beautify thy fingers shall be the 7 gifts of the Holy Ghost, and the beauty of thy face shall be the participation of the divinity, which on account of his holy love shall shine therefrom. Thereto thou shalt add the coloring of confusion for having offended him, in order that it may make thee ashamed of offending him in the future, comparing at the same time the coarse and sordid habits of the past with those that now adorn thee. 20. And because thy own merits would make but a poor and miserable return for such a high espousal, the Most High wishes to ratify this contract by singling out, as if for thee alone, the infinite merits of thy spouse, Jesus Christ, and he makes thee a partaker of all his possessions and treasures in the heavens and upon earth, for all belongs to this supreme Lord. Esther chapter 13, verse 11. And of all this thou shalt be mistress, as his spouse, for thy own use, and for the greater love of him. But remember, soul, that in order to obtain such a gift, thou must hide all this within thyself, without ever losing thy secret, for I warn thee of the danger of soiling thy beauty with the least imperfection. But if at any time thou committest such an imperfection out of weakness, rise from it at once, like a strong one, and acknowledge it. Weep over the small fault, as if it had been the most grievous. 21. And in order that thou mayest have a dwelling place and habitation befitting such a great estate, thy spouse does not wish to set thee any limit, but it is his pleasure that thou dwell in the infinite regions of his divinity, and that thou roam about and disport thyself through the illimitable fields of his attributes and perfections, where the view of the intellect is without restraint, where the will is delighted without shadow of misgiving, and where the inclinations are satiated without bitterness. This is the paradise always delightful, where the most beloved brides of Christ find their recreation, where they gather the fragrant flowers and myrrh, and where the infinite is found for those that have renounced the imperfect nothing. There will thy habitation be secure, and in order that thy intercourse and companionship may be in correspondence with it, I desire that thou converse with the angels, holding them as friends and companions, and copying from them during their frequent conversations and intercourse with thee, their virtues by faithful imitation. 22. Take notice, continued the voice, O soul, of the greatness of this benefit, for the mother of thy spouse and the queen of heaven adopts thee anew for her daughter, receives thee as her disciple, and assumes the place of a mother and of a teacher toward thee. Through her intercession dost thou receive those special favors, and they are all granted to thee that thou mayest write her most holy life. On this account thou hast been pardoned without thy merit, and that which otherwise thou wouldst have not reached has been conceded to thee. What would become of thee, O soul, if it were not for the Mother of Mercy? Thou wouldst already have perished if her intercession had failed thee. Poor and useless would have been thy works, if by divine condescension thou hadst not been selected to write this history. But the Eternal Father chose thee for his daughter, in view of this work, and for a spouse of his only begotten Son. And the Son received thee to his close embraces, and the Holy Spirit selected thee for his enlightenments. The document of this contract and espousal is written and imprinted on the white parchment of the purity of Most Holy Mary, where the finger and the power of the Most High have written it. The ink is the blood of the Lamb, and the executor is the Eternal Father. The tie which binds thee to Christ is the Holy Spirit. The bondsmen are the merits of the same Jesus Christ and of his mother, for thou art but a vile worm, having nothing to offer, and being expected to give merely by free consent.